Hello and welcome to all of you, and particularly to our special guest, Senator Durbin. We are very pleased to have him join us, and also pleased to have all of you with us. We're running a little bit late, and I'm sure you didn't come here to listen to me talk, but I do want to quickly mention the Civic Leadership Program and mention that this is a special University of Illinois program. It's quite unique and a bit different from anything that exists at any other university in this country, as far as I know. And it's aimed at giving students who are interested in civic leadership and public engagement and government service a place to begin training, begin building careers in public service at the university level while they continue pursuing their normal major and academic work here on campus. We are also very pleased to have the opportunity to partner with the Niagara Foundation, who I will now turn the program over to so that Milkan can tell you a bit about the Niagara Foundation. Thank you very much again.
Thanks, Erica Mazzotti, whom I met many years ago in her home, and she introduced me to all her cats. I won't go into the details of that story, which some have heard. Laura Pussing, thank you for your service, public service, and now you have the toughest job of mayor, where everybody can find you and everybody has an idea how to make Urbana a better city. When I asked Mayor Don Gerard how he got into this business, he said, how many years? 20 years of rock band? Something like that. Once you've been on the road with a rock band, you can do anything, he said. So we're glad you're here. Dr. Greco, thank you very much. Mr. Milkan, thank you for the nice introduction. And it's been my honor to visit your homeland of Turkey twice. It's a fascinating place. I recommend it for everyone. And from a geopolitical viewpoint, I can't think of a country positioned in and surrounded by more controversial nations. So my hat's off to Turkey and the responsibilities they've inherited. I come back home regularly every weekend, and I've done this for a long time. And what I've been trying to do during this recession is to get back to Illinois and look for businesses and companies that have succeeded in the recession, thinking, what am I going to learn? What are the lessons from these businesses? And this is my second tour. I did one a few weeks ago, and now starting off on one this week. And I'll just share a few things with you that I've learned on these tours that I think are valuable as we try to analyze the current state of the American economy and where it needs to go. I've been around the state and visited a number of places. There are some that stand out. A. Lucas and Sons Steel Fabricators in Peoria, Illinois. They're downtown. They've been there since 1857. And Margaret Hanley is the CEO. Margaret is an attractive 40-ish young woman who greeted me at the steel mill, surrounded by all of these guys in their work clothes, and took me on a tour. She has 26 employees, and they're all union iron workers. And they have worked there for a long time, and their business is booming. It's booming because she heard 2.5 years ago there was something called the stimulus program that President Obama had suggested, and that it would provide grants and loans to businesses if they wanted to acquire new equipment that would help them expand their business and jobs. And so she said, we have always wanted a computer-driven robotic laser so that we can take these steel beams and do what needs to be done, bend them, cut them, bore holes in them as required. And we had an old system, we need the best new system. It cost $750,000, and her steel mill couldn't figure out how to do it. They applied, they were successful. $350,000 grant to their company. They brought in this new piece of equipment, which she showed me, this robotic laser. She said, we will now increase our workforce by 50% next year. We compete with everybody right here in downtown Peoria. Margaret is an amazing woman. I said to her, what's your education? Bachelor's in political science from Bradley. Yeah. And then when Dad said, you better start working for the company because I don't know how much longer I'm going to stay here, I went back and got my MBA from Bradley. Then she said, when he said, I'm retiring, you're taking over the whole thing, I said, not until I get my bachelor's in civil engineering from Bradley. So she finished those 3 degrees and now runs the company. I said to her, where does your steel come from? She said, all of it from the United States. Lesson to be learned here, a company that started 150 years ago, thriving today because of a new leadership. It should be A. Lucas and Sons and Daughters. The new leadership that looks to the technology that makes her competitive with everybody. Then went to Pella Windows. I always get it mixed up. Is it Macomb or Galesburg? Bart? Macomb? Okay. In Macomb, and you think with the building downturn and lack of home construction, how can Pella Windows be doing well? They're doing very well. And of course, based in Iowa with a huge operation, they are now developing energy efficient windows, and they have a production process that is 3 shifts and is churning out product for all over the United States. Major concern, I said, what do you need? 2 things. Don't kill Amtrak. We need Amtrak. And secondly, do some work on some of the highways around here where we ship back and forth between Iowa. Infrastructure, okay? Then I went today to a company in Danville, ThyssenKrupp, German company. And Krupp, of course, if you've done any study of history, you know that name is famous in the history of business in Germany. ThyssenKrupp makes crankshafts for automobiles and trucks. And they make, apparently, the best in the world. And there they are in Danville, churning out crankshafts and selling them all over the world. They export from Danville to Europe, South America, and China, and all over the United States. I spoke to the manager there, Mr. Diaz, and I said, what's your problem? You got any challenges? Mm-hmm. What? Can't find skilled workers. And he said, we offer a good, decent starting salary and benefits, $22,000. And you can get up to $50,000. We will pay for your education. Tell me where you want to go to school, we'll pay for it. Community college, we'll pay for it. And he said, we can't get them because too few students are conversant with computers and math, which are basic. They have the most amazing precision equipment that they have to operate there. Secondly, their parents think it's a downer when the kid says, I got a job in a factory at ThyssenKrupp. Well, you could eat off the floor in this factory. I mean, not quite, but almost. And so it isn't the image many people have of manufacturing in factories. And third problem, passing the drug test, okay? So we have manufacturing factory jobs that are just going wanting because we can't fill them with skilled craftsmen and tradesmen, women, who are going to be able to fill them. So when they say that manufacturing is dead in America, I don't believe it. I think that we can compete. We just need to make sure we have the technology, the infrastructure, and the training. Those 3 things happen to be the basis for the President's jobs plan, that we are going to make sure that we out-innovate, out-educate, and be prepared to outbuild the rest of the world. Back in April, I went to China. I've been there 3 times in 20 years. First time I went there, it was China in transition. Bicycles all over Beijing, people dressed in the same basic green quilted outfits that they wore for decades, and a primitive looking economy. 10 years later in Beijing, things have changed, not as many bicycles, and now the street signs are in English and Chinese. Curious? And then in April, and you wouldn't recognize it. First, you could cut the air with a knife. The pollution is so bad in China. But they're building cranes in every direction. They have a plan and a vision, and they're executing it. And we better wake up because their plan envisions dominating the world in every industry. Every industry. No matter where I go, anywhere in the world, and ask the question, what is the presence of China in your country? The answer is always, well, it's interesting you would ask that because the Chinese have arrived here. They view us as a great source of natural resources and energy. They view us as a great source of cheap labor. That's what I heard in Africa. They view us as a potential market as our economy develops and the middle class grows, and they are prepared to do business with us. The president of Ethiopia, his name's Melis, and he said to me, if we need to build a $100 million project, the Chinese say, let us loan you the money. And I'll tell you what, you only have to pay $70 million back. A couple things we'd like you to do. Chinese contractors, Chinese engineers, and half the workforce will be Chinese. And we're coming, and we'll do it for you. And he says they've done that over and over and over again, and now they are part of the Ethiopian economy and the economy of Africa. They have decided that Africa is worth the investment. What are we doing? Next to nothing. In comparison, next to nothing. We don't have a plan and a vision. And we have people in Washington who would actually say things like, why didn't we let General Motors and Chrysler go bankrupt? That's the natural order of things. Well, I brought that up today at ThyssenKrupp. And they stopped me when we're walking. I said, what do you think of that notion? They said, that is absolutely crazy. For the United States to give up on its automobile industry, it would have been a disaster to us, ThyssenKrupp, and to all the providers of equipment and supplies all around the United States. So this notion that this free hand of the market is going to somehow bring us to a position of success and growth, I think is extremely short-sighted. We need a plan. I'm not talking about a central plan for the economy, but at least a plan that builds the economy. When it comes to the technology for Lucas and Son Steel, when it comes to the infrastructure for Pella, and when it comes to the need for skilled employees at ThyssenKrupp. And that means getting off our duff and doing it. We've had 2 votes in the last 3 weeks in Washington where we brought up the president's jobs plan. We got no Republican votes anytime we brought it up. None. It isn't as if they have a competing plan. They don't have a plan. You ask them, what do you want to do? Well, we want to protect the incomes of the wealthiest people in America. Well, that's a great plan. And what else do you want to do? We want to eliminate regulations and rules. Well, those 2 things are not going to build our economy, and it's all they have to offer. And it's time for us, I hope, for some Republicans too, to step up and say, what can we do together? I could talk about a lot of things, but I'd rather answer your questions and see what's on your mind. So let me open it at this point to any questions you have about anything. And please identify yourself. Tell me where you're from.
Hi, my name is Josh Esses. I'm a senior in finance from Stamford, Connecticut. You just mentioned how Republicans want to protect the incomes of the wealthy, but you just voted to allow Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to increase the size of the loans they can give for mortgages.
Yeah, I know. And I'll tell you why. You know, and I stood in the well and thought, is this the right thing to do? Here comes the argument. The argument is that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will only finance homes, I don't have the numbers in mind, you may, but that we need to expand the eligible home values for Fannie and Freddie. And I thought to myself, Durbin, you know they're in a perilous position because of what we went through in 2007. Yet you know as well that our real estate market is flat on its back. There's not enough activity. There are too many foreclosed homes on the market. And if we don't get the housing and real estate market moving forward in this country, it's tough to get the economy cooking. I was really torn on that vote. I could have gone either way, and you're right to call me on it, because I can't make a compelling argument. I can just tell you my logic was give them the authority to loan at higher levels of value for homes. And I think when you look at those, these aren't the homes of rich people in Stamford, Connecticut, nor the homes of rich people in most places. They're just a little bit kind of over middle-income family homes. And so that's why I did it. Thank you for calling me on it. You should have. I mean, see, so all these votes aren't crystal clear, 100% black and white. I mean, I just sat there and wrestled with that. What is the right thing to do on that? I hope I did the right thing, even although you may disagree, Josh. So, next question.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Colin Doby. I am one of the Civic leadership students. So the original Gang of Six of Chuck Grassley and Max Baucus, that didn't work. The line plan process, where the 6 legislators signed the healthcare reform appeal, and then it never led to a resolve on the Senate floor. And then the Lieberman, Kerry, Graham talks, it didn't lead to cap and trade. Gangs of well-meaning bipartisan leaders embody what we want out of Washington, but at least lately, it's not working. How do you see the super committee as moving forward, and why, in your opinion, was nobody from the original Gang of Six selected to be on their committee?
Oof, lots of questions. So I don't know if we called them Gang of Six at the time, but you're right. When we were going through health care, Grassley and Baucus were sitting down with 6 senators and trying to come up with a bipartisan plan on health care, and it blew up. I knew it blew up when I saw C-SPAN coverage of Chuck Grassley's town meeting back home in Iowa, in which I could see he was racing away from the whole notion of health care reform. And I thought, this is going nowhere. We probably spent 6 months, 8 months waiting, and it didn't work. So then we went at it, on the floor. with no Republican help. And we waited for that magic moment when we had 60 votes and finally passed it on Christmas Eve a few years ago, healthcare reform. I stand behind it. I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think it's perfect, and I think it probably needs to be changed. I've said this, you can quote me, the only perfect law that's ever been written was carried down the mountainside on clay tablets by Senator Moses. All the rest are our best efforts, and we ought to be humble enough to realize that sometimes they need changing. But I think what this healthcare reform set out to do is the right thing. Having gone through a whole lot of different deficit commissions, I can tell you, you cannot come to grips with the deficit of the United States of America until you come to grips with rising healthcare costs. They're killing us. They're killing families and individuals and businesses and governments. And we have got to find a way to reduce this cost. Fee-for-service creates perverse incentives for providers to order and over and over again unnecessary and too many tests. So that's good. That's an important thing. Then came the next iteration of this gang of, and it was all about the deficit. And I was in the first effort with Bull Simpson, where we had 18 members of the Presidential Commission, 11 of us voted for it. Still think, on balance, it was the right thing to do, and it still should be followed, even though there's some elements of it I disagree with. We took 6 senators, and a few of us had been on that commission, 3 Dems, 3 Republicans, and we spent 8 months looking at one another, cussing one another, and trying to turn that Bowles-Simpson idea into legislation. And we got very close, I'd say 95% of the way. And I disagree strongly with some elements of it, but I thought on balance, it's a better way to go. And so we kind of stepped up, and the president stepped up and said, I'll buy it. Not in its entirety, in detail, but I'll buy what they're trying to do. He was behind our effort from the start and waited until we publicly announced it so it wouldn't be an Obama product, because some would just reject it on that basis. Then came the suggestion of a super committee. So the super committee, 6 members of the House, 6 of the Senate, equally divided Democrats and Republicans. They came together first part of September. They are required to come up with a plan to reduce the budget deficit by $1.2 to $1.5 trillion over 10 years, and they have to produce it by November 1st, which you may notice is just a few days away. Now, we had the Gang of 6 come talk to them last week, and I said to them, I've seen this movie. This is the 3rd time. I saw it in the original English. I've seen it with subtitles, and now I'm seeing it in the digitized version, and it always ends the same. If you're serious, I mean really serious about this, you got to put everything on the table. Now that kills me as a Democrat to put Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid on the table, but I'd rather be there at the table when we talk about their future than outside the room carrying a sign. And it kills you to talk about revenue. But if you can't put revenue on there, I'll be damned if I'm going to go hit the people receiving Medicare. You've got to say that at least some portion of this solution has to be revenue. I don't know if they can do it. I'm not sure they can do it. They don't have much time to do it. I mean, like I said, a week before they have to give their numbers to the Congressional Budget Office. In the meantime, what we have done is take the Gang of 6 and appealed to all the members of the Senate and said, how many of you would buy this as the starting point? We're up to 44 senators, equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. And we have intentionally called a timeout and said, step back, let this super committee see if they can do it. Because if we start a competing agenda and super committee fails, they blame us. Step back. Let's hope they succeed. But we believe that the super committee is aiming too low. They're doing what they were told, 1.2, 1.5 trillion over 10 years, added to the 900 billion we've already cut in spending, but they're too low. We think it's got to go over 4 trillion in 10 years. And I actually believe that bigger is not only better, but bigger is easier. Bigger is better because what we need to do is something dynamic and bipartisan for Standard & Poor's and the rest of our critics to step back and say, holy cow, they did reach an agreement on something that's meaningful. And bigger is easier because of a political experience I had when I first got in the House. Got elected 82, came in 83. They said, welcome to Washington, Social Security's broke. Now, roll up your sleeves. We got to figure out a way to save it. We went back and forth, Democrats and Republicans, and we came up with 3 ideas. And let me tell you what they were. raise the retirement age from 65 to 67, raise the payroll tax to the highest level, and then tax benefits. Any one of those three today would have people screaming bloody murder. We did all three of them in 1983 and bought 56 years of solvency for Social Security, and even more important, nobody lost an election over it because it was bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans. So what I'm saying to these folks is when it comes to our big plan, it's easier politically to do a big plan than a small plan, because then you force everybody to the table and everybody has to give. So I don't know if the super committee will work. I want it to work. If it doesn't work, I think this gang of, the latest, 44, can grow to 51 in a hurry, and we can become a force. Sorry for the long answer.
Hi, I'm Samantha Taylor. I'm a junior here at the university, and I study political science and global studies. This is more of a general question. With the conflicts going on in Syria and the other revolutions that have already occurred, what do you see in the future, let's say in the next 10 years, Congress's relationship in foreign policy or its influence in foreign policy changing? How do you see that changing?
You're talking about the congressional role. It's a good question, and it's one that's haunted us for a long time. I think the Constitution is explicit. We cannot go to war unless Congress says so. Congress speaks for the people of this country. Congress should vote on it. And that's been my position from the beginning. And what I've come to learn is that most of my colleagues honor that in the breach. They don't want to vote on it. They don't want it on their shoulders, that they voted for or against a war. I think that's why I was elected. You know, take a hard vote, do it. And so I've called for that on when various presidents would suggest a war, and I still think it's the bottom line. Now, let me tell you how this gets complicated. There was a time when voting for war meant voting to send bombers, aircraft carriers, soldiers, sailors, Marines, Coast Guardmen. We're going. Suit up. This is going to be a real war. That isn't today. Today is a world of predator drones. It's a world of supporting a NATO alliance. It's a world of a cyber war where they may never be a shot fired, but a real war's on. And that is the reality of what a war is, but it isn't going to be a matter of a declaration. The president's not going to say, we have credible evidence that the Chinese have the capacity to destroy the American economy with a cyber war. Therefore, we're launching a cyber attack on the Chinese. That, to me, is a reality. I mean, that is, I should say, a potential that's out there. Now, at what point does Congress get involved in this? Clearly, we're using government assets, but we're not sending our sons and daughters overseas. We've got to think about definition of hostilities in the world of predator drones and definition of war in the world of cyber war. And as Congress was reluctant to get in the conversation before, it'll even be more reluctant today. We could, in the old days, you would start gathering forces on the border before an invasion. We are gathering forces now in the cyber war to be prepared to attack back if someone attacks us. What am I talking about in the cybersecurity? I'm talking about the capacity of a foreign country to, in one day, in 1 hour, disable all of the exchanges so that there's no New York Stock Exchange, there's no Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I'm talking about the capacity to disable the computers at nuclear reactors around the United States. Kinds of things that would put us spinning into chaos, trying to figure out what to do next. So it's more complex than it's ever been in terms of where we're going. But I still think in the end, the American people, through their elected representatives, have to have a voice in this. Otherwise, we vest entirely too much power in the president. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Senator. Thank you for heading over here.
Sure.
I'm Tristan Miller. I am a cadet in Air Force Crossing. I wanted to ask, what kind of plans do you currently have for helping veterans after they get home? I have a friend actually who has served 2 tours in Iraq. He's out of service now, obviously, but he's having a hard time finding employment now that he's out. So what kind of plans are we working on to take care of our veterans after they get home?
So we promise men and women who take that oath and say they'll risk their lives for America that when you come home, we'll take care of you. If you were injured in battle, you can come home to Veterans Administration that will take care of you for life, for whatever has happened to you in battle. I just went to the Danville Hospital today, and there's an increasing number of PTSD, people suffering from PTSD, and that reflects a rather substantial change in America. PTSD is a relatively new diagnosis. If any of you saw the movie Patton, do you remember the scene where he went in the hospital and there was a soldier on a cot, and he went up to him and said, "What's wrong with you, soldier?" And he said, "My nerves are shot." And Patton reached over and slapped him in the face and said, "Get back with your unit." It was a big story in the United States. That is how people viewed PTSD in 70 years ago, 60 years ago. And now, thank God, my generation came back from Vietnam, clearly many of them suffering from it, and no one paid any attention to him. Said, you know, what's wrong with this guy? He can't hold a job. He just divorced his wife. He does nothing but drink and shoot drugs, you know. And unfortunately for many of them, they had problems that were never diagnosed and never treated. Different today. And we should be treating those problems. But I think what you're getting to is the economic side of the equation, which is equally important. Today, about 10% of returning veterans are out of work. Absolutely unacceptable. That is an embarrassment to us, to think that they would come home and if they are otherwise able-bodied, not find a job. So what the President said is, Mr. Employer, here's a little incentive for you. We will give you a $9,600 tax credit to hire a vet. Okay? That ought to be an incentive to bring them on the payroll and let them prove themselves. Also, we have the GI Bill, dramatically expanded with Senator Jim Webb. I will tell you that there is an abuse going on of that with for-profit colleges. It's just, what's going on with that is a national scandal with the for-profit schools. And what they're doing to veterans is the worst. They are charging 5 times as much in tuition for many times worthless diplomas, and the government's paying it all. We're paying it all. The vets end up with nothing except wasted time when it's all said and done. So we got a lot to do, but in those areas, that's our obligation. We promised our men and women, you stand up for America, we'll stand up for you. I think that's a deal we got to keep.
Hello, Senator. I'm Michael Slana, one of the Civic Leadership Program students, and my class at the Civic Leadership Program, kind of going off of what you just said, is looking at the cost and affordability of higher education in America, and in particular for our group master's thesis. In particular, one thing that really stood out to me while doing preliminary research on this topic is how out-of-pocket costs for students are much greater in America than most other developed countries. So what is, and in your view, should be done to kind of reverse these trends, which, as you mentioned before, is very crucial for the future success of our economy?
First, ancient history, my experience. When I graduated from law school at Georgetown in 1969, I had a wife and baby and another one on the way. Yes, we did those things in those days. And I had borrowed money to get through St. Louis University for a year, Georgetown for 3 years, and Georgetown Law for 3 years. I borrowed money, and in the old days, under the National Defense Education Act, at the end of the line, when you were finished as a full-time student, they added it all up. They gave you 1 year after graduation where you didn't have to pay anything, and then you had to pay the balance over 10 years with 3% interest in equal installments. That was the deal. So I waited. I couldn't remember how much I borrowed. Who could remember all that? And so I waited and waited when I finally got the letter, and I went home to my wife, Loretta, and I said, "Oh my God, you won't believe this." And she said, "What?" I said, "They've added up all my student loans." And she said, "How much?" I said, $7,500. She said to me, "How would we ever pay that back?" And I said, "I don't know. All we can do is try, you know, see what happens." Now, the reason she said that was that I had a job coming out of Georgetown Law School, going to work for the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Paul Simon, and my annual income was $15,000. Okay, that's what I got coming out of law school. Passed the bar, 15 grand. Okay, quite a bit different today, right? But I tell you that story to put in perspective. My student loans equaled 50% of my gross salary first year out of law school, all right? Who can say that today? That the first job they have will pay twice as much as your outstanding student loan balance? And the answer is precious few people can say that. Last year in October, for the first time in the history of our country, student loan debt passed credit card debt. Debt for mortgages, debt for credit cards, debt for cars, all going down, student loan debt going up. Why? Several reasons. One, it's easy to get. It's easy to qualify for Pell Grants. They're almost automatic. And to get student loans and other loans through colleges and universities, which are protected as student loans are. Secondly, the cost of higher education has gone crazy, just crazy. What does it cost for 1 year at Georgetown Law School? $50,000. 3 years, $150 grand. I'm thinking to myself, what are they thinking? You know, this is ridiculous. This is beyond any, I told them that too, you know, I don't mind senators say those things. And there's a third thing at work here, the for-profit colleges. They're killing us. 10% of all the students graduating from high school go to for-profit schools. Those for-profit schools get 25% of all the federal aid to education, and they account for 44% of the student loan defaults. They have figured this system out, and what they are doing should be criminal. They are dragging kids in who, with their parents many times, are signing on to notes. They don't have a clue what they're doing. Not a clue. One young lady in the south suburbs of Chicago, she decided she was going to college at Westwood College. When you're taking the Kennedy and O'Hare, look at one of those big buildings off to the right, and it says Westwood College. Wow, this must be the real thing. So she went there. It only took her 5 years to get her law enforcement diploma, which she then found out was worthless. The city police department, the Cook County Sheriff, no one would recognize Westwood College. And there she was, stuck with a worthless diploma. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, and $90,000 in student loans. She's living in her parents' basement. She's 27 years old. She cannot borrow another penny to go to school. She's stuck. Now that's happening over and over and over again. Your specific question was about the expenses of school. What have I done about it? I changed things at American colleges and universities, and you may not have noticed. Bookstores are a little different today than they were just a few years ago. And now, the bookstores, at least the colleges and universities, are supposed to advertise the cost of the textbook when they tell you the course, and they're supposed to give you enough information you can go shopping for that textbook online. And they're supposed to sell the pocket parts or supplements separate from the textbook, so you can buy whatever it takes to bring it up to date without paying for the whole package all over again. It was a pretty sweet deal that was going on before that, but now I think it's a little better, and more schools are moving towards rental books as a way to deal with that. Don't be shy, come on. Are you a student?
No, I'm not. Was faculty, slightly retired at this time. My name's Jim Halley. I was wondering about the Durbin Amendment.
Which one? I have so many of these mischievous, insidious attacks.
Recent one, and to be honest with you, I've read about it, I've read controversy, but I can't tell you, so I was hoping you'd be able to tell me.
Okay.
And it, you know what, I was hoping there was a recent Durbin Amendment and only one. This one, I think, is one that passed.
About debit cards?
Pardon?
Debit cards?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
There we go. Debit card, credit card, okay? Bet most of you have one or the other, maybe both. All right. Every time I use my debit card and swipe it, Visa, in this case, has said that the bank that issues this debit card will receive a swipe fee. Visa and MasterCard set the fee paid by the retailer to the bank that issues the debit card, okay? Same thing with credit cards, but it gets into a little different world. It's complicated, but stick with me. This won't be on the final, but you might find it interesting. So the retailer started coming to us and saying, we're getting killed. This debit card swipe fee for many companies is the second or third most expensive item for them, after wages and after mortgage and rent comes the debit card swipe fee. So they said, you got to do something. We have no power as retailers, even the biggest ones, to bargain with Visa and MasterCard. Don't throw that away. We have no power to bargain with them. And their response to us is, if you don't like it, don't use plastic. Impossible. Impossible. And so they're stuck. So 5 years ago, I said, let's get a study on debit card and credit card swipe fees. Banking industry said, no way, we're not talking. We're not going to deal with it. So finally, in a moment of surprise the hell out of me, we had the Dodd-Frank Wall Street reform bill on the floor. And I came up with a plan. I thought that they would sit down and talk to me and we'd do something differently, but they didn't. And the plan was this. The Federal Reserve would do a survey of the actual reasonable and proportional cost of a debit card transaction and would establish how much could be charged, okay? And it would only apply to the biggest banks, not the little banks and credit unions, have to be over $10 billion in assets. And it passed. I got 64 votes. I had 17 Republicans. I couldn't believe this, but the retailers had done their job. They'd gone and told the story that this restaurant's getting killed and this bookstore and, you know, not only Walmart but Target and everybody in between, they're all getting killed by this thing. So the Federal Reserve under Bernanke, on their own with no political input, says, all right, what does it really cost to have a transaction fee? What should be the transaction fee? And they said, if you use a PIN number, which most of you know, they can ask for a PIN number. If you use a PIN number on a debit card, the transaction costs the bank 4 cents. If you use a signature, because there's more likelihood of fraud, 12 cents. What is the actual charge? Debit card swipe fees across America average 44 cents. So they said, we're going to figure this out. We'll put our best economists on here. We'll do the econometrics. We'll put the computer here. And in the end, they did what everybody does in Washington. They split the difference. They said they can charge 21 cents, 22 cents, okay? Well, the biggest banks, starting with Bank of America, scream bloody murder. Why? Because it's going to cost them $6 billion a year. This is huge. They make so much money on these things. Not credit cards, debit cards. This just applies to debit cards. And so Bank of America was the first out of the chute, and they said, well, we'd like to tell all of our valued customers who want access to their own checking accounts through the debit card that we appreciate your business so much, we're going to charge you $5 a month because of that no good SOB Durbin. And then the banking association started referring complaint calls to my office. It didn't work. Folks got so angry with Bank of America that the traffic on the credit union websites went up 800%. Community banks started running full-page ads saying, we're not charging a debit card fee. And I got quoted in an unguarded moment saying, Bank of America customers ought to vote with their feet. Go someplace to a bank that has your values and isn't going to gouge you $5 a month. It's called competition. Let's see how it works, you know. So what did they do? They knew this was coming for a long time. Did you notice the new run of ads that says, we will give you a 1% discount on every purchase, 2% on groceries, and 3% on gasoline if you use the new Bank of America card? It's a credit card. And the reason is they're trying to move us from debit to credit because there's no regulation of the swipe fee on credit cards. They can still charge whatever they want. So if they hit you with 75 cents more for your transaction and give you 2 cents back, I mean, that's kind of where we are. I think Americans are starting to wake up to this whole thing. I think they're finally realizing that these banks may not be our best friends. We need them as part of our economy, and I believe that. But when we repealed Glass-Steagall and let banks go beyond being banks and become investment houses, this world changed. Now to feed the expectation of shareholders, they've got to make more and more and more money every single quarter, and we pay for it. And that's why the Durbin Amendment became a big deal.
That is the one.
That's the one. Are we getting close here? Because I could stand here forever and bore you to tears. But otherwise, anybody got a question? Don't be shy.
I
Now, you already had one, so let me see if anybody else not had a question? Otherwise, we'll go to the repeat offender. I'll let you go ahead.
Hi, Christopher Boydie. I'm a sophomore in political science here at the University of Illinois, and I got a foreign policy question. You talked a bit about China earlier, in regards to economics as well as cyber combat, and my question is, how do we go about reconciling our diplomatic ties with our competition with China in the economic realm? Because we can't impose things like quotas and whatnot, because we're so closely tied with them that they could hit us right back and we'd end up in more or less the prisoner's dilemma scenario, in which case we're getting the worst possible outcome collectively. How do we go about maintaining good relations with them while competing effectively in the world market?
You got it, buddy. And let me tell you, Chris, you hit the nail on the head, and most people don't think about it this way. China is our biggest competitor and our biggest creditor. Go figure how that works. The only good news is that China cannot take a beggar my neighbor attitude toward the United States. Say, let them go straight to hell, we could care less, because they're so heavily invested in the United States. Not only capital investment and business investment, but also we're their biggest customer. We buy their stuff, and they need us to prosper and succeed. So they are in a dilemma as well, competitor-creditor dilemma with the United States. They don't want to see us go down, and I'm not suggesting we will, but that is a reality. We just had a vote a couple weeks ago on China currency. They play with their currency so that their exports are cheaper, and it means that people have a higher cost of living in their country. And so we are trying to get them to make their currency reflect the reality of their economy. And I think that's a good thing to do, because they're rather notorious in this field. But I also think, going back to my original point, I still believe that China is either the most incredible economic development in the modern era or the biggest bubble the world will ever see. I'm not sure how this is going to end. I don't think they know how it's going to end. They are directing investment in a lot of areas. They've decided shipbuilding, building the biggest aircraft, space program. We're doing it all. Now put it in perspective. In China, the GDP is less than $7 trillion a year. In the United States, over $15 trillion a year. So they have 3 times the population, 1/2 the GDP of the United States of America. Interesting, huh? And you think to yourself, what do we need to do to make sure that we are moving forward with a growth rate that allows us to be competitive? And I think it gets back to the basics I mentioned before. The technology and research, the infrastructure of this country, and preparing a group of workers at all levels that can compete in this world. But we are in a dilemma with them, and we have to deal with the reality. And the reason a person like me on the progressive side of the political spectrum has been sitting in on all the deficit talks is we cannot continue to borrow 40 cents for every dollar we spend. Number one creditor being China. We've got to get back to the point where we are closer to balance. And just subtle reminder, last time we were in balance, a fellow named William Jefferson Clinton was president of the United States. I think we can get there. We've got to reduce spending, but we've got to increase revenue to get up to about 19.5% of GDP for each one of them. But it is a serious problem. And geopolitically, I'm not sure where they are. We know where they are when it comes to Taiwan, okay? But other than that, it's not clear tomorrow where they're going to be from a foreign policy viewpoint. They are building a blue water navy. They're getting bigger. We still completely outclass them militarily, but they've got a plan. Thanks, everybody. Enjoyed being with you.
Get everybody?
Flashing in every direction. Joining with India, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa. This is my first meeting with the Niagara Foundation, and I've been to Turkey on 2 separate occasions. And I think they are a critical ally of the United States and NATO, and in terms of their future and The European Union, I think that is a fascinating issue, which may be different today than it was 2 years ago when they believed it was in their best interest. I think that now is being debated with the European Union going through its pains that it's going through. But Turkey is in a critical position geopolitically. It is surrounded by so many nations in controversy that I think we need to continue to maintain dialogue and close ties with Turkey.